Welcome, and thank you for joining today's conference, Complexity Analysis and Future Planning. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. To submit a written question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. To minimize the background noise on this call, please ensure that your audio device is muted. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. With that, I'll turn the call over to Elizabeth Fernandez. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Fernandez with the Professional Development Services Branch, and I'd also like to thank you and welcome you to today's webinar. So we have three speakers today. Our first speaker is Dr. Maggie Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin is originally from a rural community in west central Minnesota. She received her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the University of Minnesota. During school, she had a strong interest in population health, epidemiology, and regulatory medicine. Prior to joining Colorado Department of Agriculture, Maggie worked for the USDA as a supervisory public health veterinarian with FFIS, and then as a veterinary medical officer with APHIS during the HPAI outbreak. She has been with the Colorado Department of Agriculture State Veterinarian's Office since January of 2017, working primarily on livestock emergency management, disease case management, and public outreach. Maggie was named Assistant State Veterinarian in August of 2019. Our next speaker is Dr. Leslie Cole. Dr. Cole currently serves as USDA APHIS Veterinary Services as a veterinary medical officer and foreign animal disease diagnostician, and the emergency coordinator for Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. As planning section chief for one of USDA Veterinary Services' 5 national incident management teams, Leslie has served as planning section chief in several national foreign animal disease outbreak responses and understands the value of complexity analysis and future planning activities. Our next speaker is Dr. Alicia Gorsica Sutherland. Dr. Sutherland is the Assistant State Veterinarian for Oklahoma. She is a 2007 graduate of Oklahoma State University of College of Veterinary Medicine. After working in private practice, she joined the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry in September of 2013. She coordinates the animal emergency management and animal disease traceability programs for the state. And with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Dr. Maggie Baldwin.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Liz, for that introduction, and thanks to everybody for joining the call this morning. We're excited to continue our discussion on the complexity analysis tool. So I'm going to just give a brief background on how we got to where we are. In 2018, we participated in the FMD functional exercise called ARMAR, and we had our Colorado Incident Management Team as well as USDA's Incident Management Team participating in that exercise with us. And from our IMT here in Colorado, we received a couple of really good questions as we were preparing for the exercise and then going through the exercise. One of the biggest questions was, how will you as the state know when you need to bring us in as the incident management team? And then how do you know when the incident is changing? And I think many folks on this call probably know there's a lot of complexity analysis tools that exist across incident management in other areas, whether it be all hazards incidents. The Forest Service uses them regularly. And then the other questions that we got was, how do we justify funding and resources from our commissioner or our governor's office, other than saying it's really bad. We need a lot of money because it's a foreign animal disease and things are looking poorly. So what we wanted to do was, how do we quantify really bad for a foreign animal disease? Instead of just saying, we have X number of premises involved or X number of species involved, how do we put an actual, value on how bad it is? So what we did was we took some complexity analysis tools that already existed, in all hazards incidents. We had some from our public health partners as well, and we worked with our emergency management partners at the state level and local level, and put together a tool that had not previously existed for foreign animal disease, animal, agriculture incident response. And essentially, it's an Excel spreadsheet tool, and I believe it was attached to the invite for this webinar. So you should be able to take a look at that. Please feel free to look through it, review it, pass along comments to us. But what we tried to do was put together indicators and factors that were specific to foreign animal disease response. And essentially, you go through and you assign values to those factors. Values range from 0 to 5, and they're weighted values, and then you end up with a numerical score at the end of the tool. And so what we'll do at the end of this webinar is go through an ASF scenario and actually walk you through using this tool. We've completed about 50% of the tool just to save a little bit of time, but I think it'll be a valuable experience. And so during that time, we'll be able to get a little bit of input from you all as well on the webinar via chat on what the values of that tool will be. All right, and I'm going to turn over to Dr. Cole to talk about more of the complexity analysis and future planning.
Thank you, Dr. Baldwin. I want to thank all of my esteemed colleagues and our partners out there for getting on this call. The work group really thinks this is a tool that can help us be a lot more forward-leaning and less reactive, in our conduct of our responses. So here we go. Maggie has touched on this, Dr. Baldwin. As we know, there are numerous complexity analysis tools and permutations of these types of tools being used by other emergency response agencies and entities in the all-hazard environment. So, we're going to talk about those a little bit. Complexity analysis tools provide decision support to our agency administrators and incident commanders and our teams. And also we're going to kind of drill down into what information can be gleaned from the application of these tools to your incident, and kind of when in the flow or life of an incident we would use these. We want to make the complexity analysis tool useful to you. We want you to see how it can be used and the benefits. All right. And, I'm not going to read the slides to you, but I do think, it's good to verbalize some of these ideas. And for us, complexity and, as applied to the incidents we're involved in, complexity is generally used to characterize something with many parts where those parts interact with each other in multiple ways. In the context of this analysis, complexity refers to the interconnectedness and dependence of individual elements as they relate to planning and implementation of the incident response, okay? And this is from the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, and, they're one of the expert practitioners of emergency response, ICS, and the use of these tools. This is a good quote from one of our leaders, and like with a lot of features of the incident management system, incident command system, this is a tool that kind of codifies and makes a checklist out of something we do all the time anyway. As we battle foreign animal diseases, this analysis takes place all the time in the minds of the incident management team members, if nowhere else. By doing this in a consistent manner and documenting that analysis, our decision-making and our justification to agency administrators for change are more defendable, justifiable, and accurate. Like Dr. Baldwin said, how do you quantify bad? How do you quantify or justify a resource request? These tools help with that, okay? And this was a quote from my friend Dr. Barb Porter-Spalding, and I appreciate her support with this. Let's see. Okay, why do we need to try to implement complexity analysis and these types of tools in our ag responses? First of all, and you guys know this, our responses to foreign animal disease are complex. These incidents are complex. Multiple jurisdictions, geographic distances, unusual and different resource needs, high personnel needs. These are complex responses, and all the tools we can use to anticipate these needs and craft our responses is a great advantage. Repeatedly in after action reports, particularly from the HiPath AI in 2014 and 15, it's noted that we need a better way to size up an incident initially and particularly in transition to get the resources and tactics and objectives in place that we need to manage these responses. And again, this has been noted repeatedly in many after actions. So there's that justification. Many, as we've said, entities in emergency response use complexity analysis tools or tools like this. Some are even computer programs that can come up with advice on staffing or equipment even. They're suggestive, but they don't tell you what you have to have. They inform your decision makers. Also, we have been working on complexity analysis and the adaptation and socialization of this concept and these tools for several years in one of the National Training and Exercise Program events, 2.2.29, if you ever see that. All of these tools, again, are used by many agencies when we think of practitioners of emergency response, you know, the U.S. Forest Service, FEMA, the United States Coast Guard, as Dr. Baldwin mentioned, state emergency management, state forestry and incident response teams. So these tools are very, very widely used in the emergency response community, and when we respond together with some of these entities, like many of the states will bring on their either all-hazard or forestry emergency management teams to help when we have a foreign animal disease response. These folks are looking for a complexity analysis to get started in managing. Okay. And we want to socialize this. We want folks to understand this is not just extra work that we're trying to add to the already busy suite of responsibilities and actions that everybody has to do when we're on a response. As Dr. Porter-Spalding said, we're doing this in our minds already, and this is a tool that can kind of make a checklist out of this. So, you know, you're doing it, and it helps you not to forget a step or something to be considered. So here we go. As with most practices of ICS, many of them, responder safety is one of the prime reasons these tools have been developed, as, again, with many aspects of the incident command system. That's a prime driver of a lot of the things we do. It provides broad decision support information to our administrators and incident commanders that size up when you come on. These tools are used to gauge the type of incident management organization that's needed. Do you need a Type 3 team, a Type 2, a Type 1? That is directly dictated by the complexity. It helps gather information to let the agency administrators and incident commanders come up with incident objectives and priorities, and it informs tactics as well, all right? As Dr. Baldwin mentioned, we can use these to predict or estimate the type and kinds of resources that we need. If you guys have watched fire folks use this, this helps dictate a type 1 engine or type 2 or the types of crews they need. So this is very useful in tactics. This is a point that we want to make too, is this is very useful as the incident goes through its life to right-size the response. Dr. Beckett mentioned that a big challenge in managing incidents is right-sizing. When do you need to contract your organization, cut loose equipment, change your geographic boundaries? Downsizing or contracting the organization is a real thing we all have to do and manage and face as we go through the incident cycle, and these tools can really help with that. Quantifying resource needs, justifying resource requests, quantifying how bad this is, and justifying that to supervisors, agency administrators, MACs, and justifying our resource requests. This gives you hard data to say this is why we need these resources up the chain. Plus, you've got a document that said, I determined that we needed these resources and we requested them, and so you have proof that you were to support your tactics and how you were going to deploy these resources. If you don't get them and things don't go right, you've got some justification that you were on the right track. And also, this provides information to our administrators and the incident commanders and the incident management organization about potential external political or social influences. And we all know how large these factors can become as we execute responses in communities and around the country. There we go. As we've talked about, we want to make this, everyone view this as a tool that we can use and not a burden. The arrows indicate places where this activity is going on, this type of analysis, complexity analysis is going on, and we've talked particularly about during the initial size-up of an incident when the first team's coming on, how do they determine the right tactics, the right amount of equipment, the right personnel to get started. This is very helpful with that. And as we go into the life of the incident and we initiate the planning P, this can be applied very logically and easily during the daily tactical reassessment that goes on every day or every time you run your planning cycle. And a note too, these tools don't have to be used every day. You use them when you see changes coming in your incident. You use them when you see a need for deciding if you continue to use resources or tactics, or you need to contract your response. So these are the places that this logically fits in the planning cycle. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about some definitions of some other terms that we're using here, kind of the distinction or the definitions of future planning and contingency planning. These tools are useful for future planning, and these future planning allows for the incident management team to plan for operational periods beyond the next planning cycle, beyond where you're making your incident action plan for. These future plans do transition as you move forward in time into your daily operations. Future planning allows your incident management team to define the desired end state. We all want the disease to be gone, but what exactly does that mean? You know, do we have all the quarantines released? Do we have our geographic boundaries aligned so that we do monitoring? Have we reestablished disease freedom with our international trading partners? This allows that desired end state to be more specifically designed so that we can anticipate what kind of response activities, what kind of tactics that we may have in place or need in place a week out, 2 weeks out, a month out. So, again, this quantifies that desired end state, all right? And as far as contingency planning, what we're talking about there is you make specific plans for a predicted event. You know, when we're up in Iowa in the summer in a high-path response, there are thunderstorms and tornado alerts every other day. That is something that's a specific event that you make contingency plans for so that you protect your people and manage how they handle those. SIA does modeling of disease spread and can do that for us. You know, when we start a response, you can use that type of modeling data to do contingency planning. If this happens, we can do these tactics, such as that. Another very common contingency plan is if you have responder injuries. You know, no names over the radio, check the 206 for the nearest hospital, alert the supervisor. Those are things that we do standard contingency planning for, right? And those are the, you know, nuances of some of these items we're discussing today. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over back to Dr. Maggie Baldwin. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Cole. So as Dr. Cole mentioned, there's a lot of applications that you can use this complexity analysis tool for. And I should have shown the scale on this slide as well. I hope you've been able to look at the Excel spreadsheet that was sent out. The scale is at the very bottom of that Excel spreadsheet. And it essentially goes from 0 to 495, and it helps you determine, you know, which type of incident you are looking at. So what we did, Dr. Rohr and myself, recently in preparation for this webinar, we went through kind of a retrospective analysis of our last 3 years of vesicular stomatitis response in Colorado. And unfortunately, that did not include 2020, as many other states are experiencing this year, and oddly, it didn't include 2020. But we do have some data, of course, from 2014 and 2015 outbreak, as well as our 2019 outbreak. And what's interesting using this as a retrospective analysis for VSV is that, you know, the virus itself has not changed much, but our response to the virus really has changed. And I think that's pretty clear here in the tool and the scores. So in 2014, we had 370 premises in Colorado affected by VSV. And at that time, all cases required a foreign animal disease investigation. We did not have the non-lab activated for VSV. Of course, everything went to NVSL. In 2014, the quarantine times were pretty extensive. They all required in-person visits in order to be released. And at that time, in 2014, actually Colorado brought in a USDA incident management team to help manage the incident. And like I said, we only had 370 premises at that time. When we went through the tool for 2014, we had a complexity analysis score of 245, which equates to a type 3 incident management team. And that is what a USDA incident management team is typed at, as a type 3. So that was, an appropriate level of response at that time. And then I think most folks on the call probably know between 2014 and 2015, there had been pretty drastic changes in VSV response and USDA guidance. There, of course, was, the OIE list, delisting was a big reason for a lot of that response change. So we began using accredited veterinarians in the field for equine cases, and that really took a burden off of our state and federal VMOs in the field, not having to go out and investigate every case in person. The quarantine times were drastically reduced as well, and NOM labs were activated at that time. So, CSU in Colorado was activated. When we went through the complexity analysis tool, we had, more premises in 2015 than we did in 2014. We had 441 premises, but our complexity actually reduced to 210. And that still is within the type 3 incident score range. But again, this tool is just to help you kind of gauge and guide where your incident may land. And at that time, we did not bring in any additional, we did not bring in an incident management team, but I think USDA was still pretty heavily involved in 2015. And then I think most folks know in 2019, Colorado had a pretty significant VSV outbreak. We actually had 693 premises under quarantine or positive or managed as positive throughout the year. And as we went through the tool, though, our complexity analysis score was only 178, which was a type 4 incident. And so, the complexity changed. And I think that as we looked through the tool, I think the complexity changed because our management of the incidents has changed. We've had improved management tools. We've really learned a lot of lessons from 2014 and 2015 in what worked and didn't work, and that helped improve our state response. We actually only brought in one additional employee, a temporary employee, to assist. And we really utilized our team that we had at CDA very efficiently. Everybody had clear roles. We set up an incident management chart with everybody's roles defined, and really had improved tools, and that helped kind of streamline our response dramatically. We also, because we had worked with the accredited veterinarians in 2015, we really, learned lessons and what could assist us this year, and had greatly improved coordination with our accredited veterinarians in the field and with our NOM lab, because they had also been activated in 2015. We had some lessons learned, and we implemented those in 2019, and that was, greatly reduced the complexity of our incident. So, as you look at the retrospective analysis, you can see even though our number of premises affected almost doubled from 2014 to 2019, our complexity analysis score really did reduce significantly, and I think that was just more so due to our response management than anything else. The disease itself didn't change, but our response to the disease did change. So I think next we're going to have Dr. Gorsica Sutherland talk about how Oklahoma used their tools, used the complexity analysis tool in their exercises.
Thank you, Dr. Baldwin. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to provide a little bit of a different perspective just to kind of give an example of how you can take this tool that was developed and integrate it into your training and exercise programs. And so just to provide a little bit of background as far as how incidents are managed here in Oklahoma, And we are very fortunate to be closely tied with our state forestry services. You know, forestry is in our agency name, and so our forestry team, and actually they currently have been requested and deployed to California to assist with those wildfires. But members of this team are Type 1 and Type 2, you know, trained as far as their position-specific training. So, you know, our state forester is a Type 1 incident commander, so we are incredibly fortunate to have, you know, this type of knowledge and training here in the state, as well as being able to utilize them for managing our incidents. So, so that's kind of a background on sort of how we got forestry involved with our, you know, training and exercise program. And so because Oklahoma is one of the top swine-producing states in the nation, of course, with knowledge of African swine fever spreading through China, through Southeast Asia, it was a very real concern for us here in Oklahoma, and we wanted to be able to prepare ourselves for that type of response as well as industry. So we began participating in the African swine fever exercise series that began November of 2018 and it concluded in September of 2019. So it was a very busy time period, doing lots of ASF planning and preparation. But one of our very first exercises that we had, that we brought in our forestry management team, was a exercise. It was basically a planning exercise for ASF back in February of 2019. And that was a workshop basically helping us sit down and write out our ASF plan. At the end of that workshop, our state forester came up to me and said, hey, you know what would really help us be better prepared and have a better understanding of the gravity of this situation would be a complexity analysis. And then went in to tell me about how, you know, that is a common tool that they utilize during their responses, regardless of the size of the fire. And so I took that, you know, piece of tidbit back with me, and because Oklahoma is part of the Multi-State Partnership for Security in Agriculture, I'd already had a little bit of familiarity with complexity analysis based off of the work that, you know, Dr. Maggie Baldwin and Dr. Nick Striegel had done with the complexity analysis. So naturally reached out to my friends in Colorado, said, hey, I need this tool. I need to get it, you know, ingrained into our response plans. And so they were more than happy to share that with us here in Oklahoma. So by the time our next exercise happened in April of 2019, I had already incorporated that tool into our African swine fever response plan. And so by the time we got to SPEAR, which was sort of the ending of this exercise series, and which was a much more robust exercise, you know, I brought the complexity analysis tool to the table. And so after we had done our delegation of authority to our forestry team to help manage our incident, you know, the scenario, I was able to, like Dr. Cole's already talked about, you know, we brought it in at the first sort of size up of our incident, and then we utilized it every operational period. Of course, for us during the exercise, the operational period was, you know, every 24 hours. So daily until this exercise series ended, we redid the complexity analysis tool. And so myself, along with our incident commander and our ops chief, sat down, went through every single question that you'll be able to have an opportunity to see here in just a moment. And based on how our scenario was playing out, based on the injects that we were receiving, being able to provide a new score each day to give us a better idea of, like Dr. Cole mentioned, what resources were we needing? Were we able to, you know, what other things were we going to need to bring in to help better manage this incident? And while it was only a functional exercise, it really was a good opportunity for us to use this tool and to be able to provide something that our forestry services, they're comfortable with, they use it daily, and it really helped them get a better understanding of how bad ASF would be in Oklahoma. So based on those experiences during the ASF exercise series, you know, future use for us here in Oklahoma, the tool has already been incorporated in all of our foreign animal disease response plans. It's an annex, it's an appendix, you know, and it's there. We're gonna go to that. We're gonna pull it out in the event that we have an incident. And then the other thing that we're doing here in Oklahoma is that we're making it a point to have it be utilized during our upcoming exercises. So we do have several coming up for the 2020-2021 time period. And one of our, you know, sort of an expected outcome while we're conducting these exercises is that we complete a full complexity analysis tool, so we have a better idea of sort of how bad it really is, and gives us a better idea of how we need to manage this incident. But it also gives us the opportunity to continue to practice using it, and like Dr. Baldwin mentioned, be able to refine it to make it more specific to foreign animal disease response. And so with that, what we're going to do next is introduce a scenario and actually be able to walk through the complexity analysis tool that we've been talking about. And so it's appropriate that I provide this overview because, and again, this is just an exercise. So essentially what has happened is African swine fever has been detected in a SAHO unit in Oklahoma. And this is a very realistic scenario here for us in the state. So a 2,800 head SAHO unit reported to have slowly increased morbidity and mortality over the previous week to 10 days. The company veterinarian contacted the state veterinarian and we initiated a foreign animal disease investigation. Once that was completed, sampling from some recently deceased sows were confirmed positive for ASF from NDSL fattle. Some more information or epi information that will help us going through the tool is that this particular SAHO unit has moved approximately 1,200 pigs a week to nursery sites within Oklahoma and Kansas over the past 2 weeks. So we have this sort of information. We know the size of our farm, and we know that we've had very recent swine movement from the farm, not only into Oklahoma, but as well as to our neighboring state in Kansas. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Baldwin to be able to share her screen so we can walk through the tool in real time.
All right, great. Let me go ahead and share my screen and make sure you can see that. Dr. G, can you see my screen all right with the tool up?
I do, yes.
All right, great. So as I mentioned previously, I've already went ahead and filled in half of this tool. So I just filled in every other so we could go through together. And what I would like is if you guys, as you're going through this and reading along with this, please feel free to drop some ideas and thoughts in the chat box, and Liz will share that with us. So hopefully you are all able to read this okay. I'm not going to read each of the ones that I've filled in. I'll let you guys go through those as well. You know, like Dr. G and Dr. Cole had mentioned, you know, this is a tool we can use at any time. So right now, what we know, we're going to be using this from Oklahoma's perspective, is that, you know, ASF has been detected in one farm. There are some traces they're going to start working on. Let's see how complex it is right now. And this is a tool you should be able to complete, you know, with your incident manager or incident commander, you know, in 5 to 10 minutes, depending on, I guess, the complexity and how much discussion you want to have about each of the items. But it should be pretty quickly go through this, and hopefully we'll finish it in the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So our first blank one here is for personnel resources for field and incident management. So as you can see here, there's a value of 1, a value of 3, and a value of 5. You can assign 2s and 4s, and we do pretty routinely for that as well. So Do we think that this disease outbreak is going to be managed by regular in-state USDA and state animal health officials at this time, or will we require more animal SME incident responders than available in-state, or require other state or USDA district-wide personnel? Or will there be an extreme need for national deployment of animal health incident responders in the field for incident management? Do we have any comments in the chat yet, Liz?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, then I might just ask Alicia, do you think you're going to be able to handle this in state, or are you going to need to bring in some USDA personnel from outside?
So right now, with the preliminary epi work that, with the knowledge that we have right now, I feel like this would be a value of 3. I think as the incident expanded, of course, then the complexity expands as well, and it would probably be a 5 later on. But I think at this point in time, we would do a 3.
Perfect. All right. So
we do have one in the chat that, we have one in the chat that also agreed a value of 3.
Great. And as you can see, when you enter in that value, it multiplies by the weighted factor and gives you your total points. So the next one is going to be incident action plans, forms, tracking, et cetera. So value of 1 would be very limited need for documentation ICS forms. 3 would be a moderate amount of forms needed for herds, EMers, WebEOC, additional staffing needed, or a value of 5 would be large amount of documentation, resource tracking, epi and mapping, significant staffing needed. I'm thinking
we have one question. We have one question that came in that's 3 or 4 because of the swine movement.
Yes, right. That's what I'm thinking as well, because we're going to need to start working with, additional state partners on that for the tracking. So I think that makes perfect sense. Dr. G, do you agree on that?
I do, Dr. Baldwin.
Great. All right. So public awareness through public information is, I think, pretty important with any incidents that we do, that we deal with. So a value of 1 would be mitigating the outbreak can be easily done via public messaging, or 3, messaging must be reinforced continuously and a moderate amount of work to inform via various means, some closures of events. Public awareness for number 5 is difficult, and incident has negative implications on the economy, many closures of events and quarantines. Where do you think in Oklahoma you guys would be?
Yeah, well, we have one that came in as a 5.
Okay. Dr. G, anybody else?
Oh, we have one came in as a 4.
4s, okay. Yeah, I think at this point, and probably we can all guess, even after what has happened with just this spring with, our swine backups, that probably public information is going to be pretty well needed at that point in the beginning. All right. The next one we're going to look at is multiple jurisdictions directly impacted. A 1 would be contained within 1 or 2 counties, minimal consequence management. 3 is 3 to 5. 3 to 5 counties are directly impacted with moderate consequence management needed, or a value of 5 is statewide ag communities affected with large amounts of consequence management for entire communities, or this would also be true if the introduction of disease was intentional. And because we made this scenario up, we're going to say it was not intentional. I think at this point we have 1 farm that we know is impacted, and then 2 premises that it's been moved to in Oklahoma and Kansas.
So we have something that came in 3 to 4, another one that said 3.
Okay. I think I probably would agree with 3, because right now we only have 1 confirmed and then working on traces. So I think that makes sense at this point. And again, as that expands, this is where the complexity analysis tool comes in really handy. As we get to, more states, more counties impacted, this value will increase, and that's going to increase your complexity and need for, additional resources. All right, so animal demographics, we have value of 1 is low to medium density of production animal populations affected. 3 is medium to high density of production animal populations affected, low to medium risk of disease spread, and few industry premises impacted by quarantines or other disease response strategies. A 5 is high density of production populations in affected areas, high risk of disease spread to many populations, many premises impacted by quarantine and other disease response activities. Where do you think at this point we'll be for that? Maybe Dr. G, since you're most familiar with Oklahoma, and you can just pick wherever you want to land the SAHO unit.
Well, if I get to choose that, then we're probably looking at a 3, because I'm going to pick the part of the state that has the least amount of commercial swine.
Right.
But to be realistic, we will throw this farm in the Panhandle, and so at this point in time, for me, it really would be between a 4 and 5. And because we only have, based on our made-up scenario, we just have the 1 confirmed farm, I'm just going to say a 4.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So
and somebody just pointed out that I missed.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
Okay, great. So, yeah, we did miss the objectives. My apologies. It's a little bit squirrely. I'm scrolling on this enlarged screen. So objectives, value of 1 would be objectives are easily achieved. Value of 3, they're moderately difficult to achieve. Value of 5, they're difficult to achieve or eclipsed by new objectives each day. There's conflicts between objectives and constraints. So I think this one is a little bit tricky for us to do probably via webinar because I think, ideally this would be a tool that Incident Command uses and we would have had set objectives. So I don't know, Dr. G, do you want to just assign a value based on some of your conversations that you had in your ASF exercises with your incident commanders?
Right. So for the very first time we went through this particular tool during our sphere exercise, at that point in time, it was a very similar scenario. It was only confirmed in one particular, at one particular farm. Yes, there was some recent movement. But our set objectives at that point in time, we felt were going to be, while a little bit difficult to achieve, as we continue to learn more information. But that very first time we used it, we assigned a 4 to that for those objectives.
Okay, great. All right. So disease introduction, make sure I didn't miss one. Okay, disease introduction is going to be our next one. A value of 1 is a single disease introduction, appears to be naturally caused. Value of 3 is few disease introductions appear to be naturally caused. And a value of 5 is multiple disease introductions detected, source unknown, and intentional introduction suspected. So we did make this scenario up, and we have only confirmed it in 1 premises so far. So any thoughts? I haven't seen any chat come in, but any thoughts on values for this one?
There is 1 chat, 2 to 3, only 1 confirmed case so far.
Great. So maybe let's throw it at a 2. I'd be good with that. We don't know exactly, where it came from yet, but well, I agree putting it at a 2. Okay, so anticipated duration of resource commitment is going to be our next one. Value of 1 would be 1 to 3 days on the scene, or long-term but low involvement of responders in state, not likely in this scenario. A value of 3 is state needs moderate involvement and other duties take back seat. Could be long-term outbreak, but sporadic heavy involvement. Or a 5 is going to be greater than 7-day outbreak with heavy involvement from the state. Any comments or thoughts on that? Ideas on values?
We have 1 that came in as a 5.
A 5.
I think I would definitely agree with that. It would be a 5.
Yep. And I think, honestly, for most of our foreign animal disease response scenarios that we think of, unless we're saying maybe rabbit hemorrhagic disease might not be a 5, but, you know, I think that most of them are going to be pretty long-term and pretty heavy involvement. The next one is quarantines needed to control disease. Value of 1 would be occurring only on initial premises, but planning taking place for additional premises as needed. Value of 3 is on a moderate scale, and 5 is numerous quarantines to manage movements on and off farms and operations. So where we're at in this scenario right now is we'll probably have 1, and I think I saw, Liz, a chat come in there as well.
Yeah, 1 right now, but could change with trace.
Yep, great. Okay, and we're just about done. I think we've got a couple more here. Biosecurity procedures on infected, contact, and susceptible premises. The value of 1 is minimal needed and minimal premises in need, and 3 is moderate amount and moderate amount needed, and 5 is high number of premises, and the statewide ramped-up biosecurity is needed. Let's see.
We have a 4 that came in.
Okay. We'll go ahead and throw a 4 in there. I think I'd probably agree with that. And that, you know, might change. Okay. And then I think this is our last one, and we'll get a score. Maybe we've got 2 more. Depopulation of affected premises. So a value of 1 would be a small number need to be euthanized and need crop feed. Value of 3 is moderate number need to be depopulated, euthanized, or a moderate number of premises. And then value of 5 would be a large number of animals to be depopulated. So right now we're only on 1 premises. Dr. G, what do you think?
Well, we do have a 2,800 head sow, but the other thing to remember is that they have piglets. So for us, I mean, I feel like that's going to be a large number of animals. Granted, it's not a large number of premises at this point in time, but, you know, anything over a couple hundred head is always a challenge when you're looking at depopulation. And so I'm going to make this a 5 for us here in Oklahoma.
Okay. All right. And the last one is virus elimination and cleaning and disinfection. So value of 1 is 1 to 2 prems. Value of 3 is moderate number of prems. And then value of 5 is large number of prems. So right now, I mean, we've got 1 confirmed premises. Any thoughts on this last one?
I don't see anything coming through.
Okay. Well, how about we just throw a 2 in there? Dr. G, does that sound reasonable to you?
It does.
All right. So we've gone through and now we've, you know, assigned values to all of our different factors, and our total number of points at this point is 294. So let me just scroll down just a bit. And that is going to land us in a type 3 incident here, which would be from 198 to 297, but really on the high side of that type 3 incident. So this would be, you know, a USDA type 3 incident management team coming in to, you know, potentially assist the state. And this is a tool that Dr. G and Dr. Hall could use to tell their commissioner or Secretary of Ag that they need, you know, additional outside resources. So I hope that it was helpful to walk through this tool with everybody on the call and, you know, get some values. Again, I think the more that we use this and the more that we refine this tool is going to be helpful. Liz, were there any other comments on the scenario before we go to closing questions?
There were no other comments. Well, there's some comments about the scenario and the actual tool. So I'll go ahead and start to read those questions. The first one is, how many proficient i.e. well-trained and experienced users of the CA tool does VS currently have?
So I'll take that. This is Don Beckett. I saw that come in, and I think we've tried to make it as simple and foolproof as we can so that people who have good knowledge of disease response can fill that out. I think as we went, because that came on before we went through the spreadsheet, I think that pretty much anybody who has a broad knowledge of response activities could fill that out with little or no prompting. So that was the intent as Maggie and the team has made this up. And hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, the next question is, in the Colorado example, it appears that the CA drop-in score for 2019 was affected by less involvement of regulatory personnel and more involvement of private vets. Did this approach allow for more premises affected?
So, yeah, I guess good question, trying to put that in a little bit of context. It really was, it probably did increase complexity for private practitioners, and actually we did hear that a little bit, but it really was just a change in management and, you know, USDA allowing for private practicing veterinarians to collect samples and submit them for VSV response. And again, this is something that we've talked about in, you know, other diseases as well. You know, could we have private practicing veterinarians involved in other foreign animal disease response? And I don't know, but it certainly does help our side in complexity because we're really just involved in the case management and making sure quarantines are implemented. And so it doesn't necessarily depend on the number of premises. As you saw, our complexity decreased even though we had twice the number of premises. But it certainly did make things a bit more complex for private practicing veterinarians, I would imagine.
The next question is, do you generally adjust the weight factor for each question for each different incident?
So no, the weight factors are standard. You adjust the value assigned for each time that you use the tool. You adjust the value assigned. The weight factors were kind of determined based off of some other tools, complexity analysis tools that we went through when we first put this together, and that included some all hazards incidents, that included some from our public health partners, and then, you know, we floated the tool around nationally through the NTEP work group and got some feedback on not only the values, but the weighted factors and the end values as well.
The next question is, how did you decide the weight factor?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I just mentioned. It was, you know, really just kind of going through other complexity analysis tools and other elements and factors that were in other tools in working with our emergency management response partners. We do have a complexity analysis work group here in Colorado at the state level as well that goes through, you know, with our public health partners and their tool, our incident, our all hazards incidents tool, as well as CDOT, our Department of Transportation has their own tool. And so we just had a lot of different input from emergency management partners on that.
And this, you might have already answered this. Who defines the values for each ranking element?
Yep, so it really depends on the use of the tool. Typically, if we're using it during an actual incident, like Dr. G mentioned and Dr. Cole mentioned, it's going to be your incident commander is going to do that, maybe with your ops section chief, and Dr. G was in on that in Oklahoma as well. So you kind of just set a defined, you know, set of people throughout the incident that are going to use it, and then they use it at each operational period and assign those values.
Yeah, I love this. I love cool spreadsheets. Thanks for this. Is there a decision tool for deciding weight of each column, and is this predetermined, and if so, why?
Yeah, well, the weights like I mentioned, we're, just kind of assigned with input from our emergency management partners and other folks that have put complexity analysis tools together. And then again, when we floated it through the National Training Exercise Program work group, we got additional input on that. So they're set weight factors, but we'd love to, if there's anybody that has input on that, please feel free to contact any of us. I have our contact information up here on the screen. Feel free to contact any of us, and we'll be happy to, get any feedback and put that in our work group and try to incorporate any feedback that we get.
The next question is, would it be prudent to increase to a type 2 score with this situation and the possibility of more prems being involved?
I'll take that question, and I would say yes. I think it would have been more realistic, for at least the scenario that we portrayed, for it to be bumped up to a type 2, just because of the fact that it was African swine fever and the sort of economic and national ramifications that come with confirming that in the country. So I would definitely have agreed to bumping that up to a type 2.
And we have another comment. How do we get the tool?
Great. So, yeah, you can reach out to any of us on this webinar. Our contact information is there. I think, Liz, did you also attach the partially completed tool to the invite, perhaps?
I did. Yep, it was all attached to the friendly reminder. So I sent a friendly reminder out this morning, and it was attached to that.
Great. And then I think, once we have, if we do get any feedback after this webinar and we get that incorporated, we'll be happy to recirculate that through the NTEP working group as well.
And that's perfect because we can get it out to folks. Also, there's comments. Really appreciate that you included this scenario in the presentation. It's been a great presentation, really helpful for youth response. And then the last question I have is, how has COVID-19 affected your current emergency response training?
I can answer that, and then Dr. Baldwin and Dr. Cole, if you want to chime in on your experiences. But at least here in Oklahoma, we actually were supposed to have the National Veterinary Stockpile full-scale exercise. It was scheduled for August last month, actually, and because of COVID-19 concerns and travel restrictions, we kind of tentatively moved it for November of this year. However, again, because of COVID still being a real threat, it's being postponed even further to spring of 2021. And the same thing goes, Oklahoma was participating in another NTEP exercise series called FAD-SAFE. And again, that exercise was supposed to be scheduled for November of this year, and it's been actually postponed for November of 2021. I do have another exercise that's being planned for November. That's kind of a popular month, it seems. However, because of COVID, we are still going to pursue having this, but what we've done is we've limited the personnel to just essential personnel that we would need to conduct the exercise. We have reserved multiple rooms to spread out all of our responders and participants of the exercise, going to be following CDC guidelines as far as having, trying to encourage social distancing, wearing masks while we are, engaging in the exercise, as well as having a virtual piece to it and having doing a Zoom or WebEx at the same time to allow those that want to participate virtually still be able to be involved with the exercise. So it definitely has been challenging this year for our training program, trying to adapt and adjust the schedules, and so it's been a challenge.
So we do have a couple questions. They're asking, so I did send out on the friendly reminder, but it was a PDF instead of the Excel file. So maybe somebody can send me the Excel file, and once I get the attendance report, I can then send that out to everybody that's got online today.
Right.
And we have two more questions. For example, has Oklahoma adjusted in the weights based on the differences between Colorado and Oklahoma?
I haven't, because I see this tool hopefully being a national tool, and so that it can be standardized, and so that we have, some consistency when we utilize this tool. That is definitely a great suggestion and consideration, but for me currently, I have not.
So this is Don Beck. I think where you get the local capabilities and factor those into your actual score that you give. And so you take into account your manpower resources and the situation on the ground when you actually score it. But I don't think the weights really need to change. It's just the impact on your state or your response.
Yeah, Don, I agree, and I think we did get a lot of questions on the weight factors, and so if those folks asking the questions have some additional thoughts, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to have you on our next work group call so we can kind of talk through some of those questions a little bit more if you have any ideas on how we can continue to improve the tool.
And the last comment I have is that I'm interpreting the BS personnel have not used this tool to date.
This is Leslie, and I'll speak to this from a VS NIMT plans perspective. We have circulated this tool for use by our plans chiefs and their sections, which is where this tool would live in the response organization, and we've done it informally at this point, no mandates or anything like that, but we're just trying to get it socialized and get people to be thinking about it. So that's about where we are with that.
And this is Don Beckett, and I really think it's important to remember that the state and the federal response and a local response work together to develop this. So if you're saying whether the VSIMTs have used it, probably not yet. But if you're asking whether the states and the federal combined state-local response have used it, I would say the answer is yes, at least in exercises. It seems to be the initial blush or the initial use of this is as a tool. I got an IM from Jane Rooney who wanted to remind us of that, but it's not an absolute answer, but it's a tool that you use to do justified upsizing or downsizing or right-sizing a response. And you can also look at it at a point in time. So what we were looking at on the scenario was, as of today, knowing what we know today, this is what we need. And then you can do it, as Leslie said, you can use it as a future planning tool because we know this is going to spread in our minds. And so then you can look at the resources you might need a week or two or three down the road, and then the decision has to be made of whether we go with the highest response that we expect to happen initially or if we gradually increase. And I think that depends on the disease itself.
Okay. We have no other questions in the queue. And with that, I'd like to thank all of the speakers today and everybody who attended the webinar. If you have any ideas that the VS NTEP can explore for emergency preparedness community, feel free to contact us. And you can find other webinars on vaccine and many other topics on the TEP video gallery online, which is posted on the APHIS USDA Animal Health Training and Development video gallery. And the link for the video gallery is also listed on the webinar announcement. We have another webinar coming up next week on September 10th about EMRS to go, which will be presented by Dr. Brian Archer. And with that, I will bid you all a great rest of your day and a happy holiday weekend. Thanks, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Services. You may now disconnect.